if you're running your shocks in a lean forward position like mine, or you're just allowing the rear axle to compress pretty far up, Hey guys, welcome back to REVolutionX RC. Today I've got a few upgrades going into my Element Enduro Sendero. Among the things that I'm going to be upgrading on my Element Enduro Sendero are the Club5 Racing Husky Link high clearance suspension links right here. I will also be using the Club5 Racing Husky Link stainless steel steering links. Last but not least, the Club5 Racing brass shock bushing. And I'll put a link to all of these in the description below. Aside from these Club5 Racing parts, I also will be updating the bracket that I've been using for my IERC Shorty bed. So I've been using this to mount the IERC Shorty bed to my Element Enduro Sendero, like so. And basically this will kind of bolt into the chassis frame. And then I have this IERC bed bolting into this plate. It worked, it just wasn't, kind of as polished as I would have liked. And so now that I've gotten into 3D printing, I've created this bracket here. So I also will be installing this in my Element Enduro Sendero in order to mount the IERC bed like so. So it's a chassis brace, so it'll actually stiffen up the rear of the chassis as well as allow me to mount the IERC Shorty bed easily. Another piece we're going to be looking at today is this 3D printed mid chassis brace that I created, and specifically this mid chassis brace is supposed to allow usage with high clearance links. So I created this because I needed to be able to use this mid chassis brace with these high clearance links. On Thingiverse, they do have this mid chassis brace available, but the problem is these were created with the stock links in mind, and so the high clearance links would hit up against this section right here. So I created this one, and it's got a cutaway to let the links, the high clearance links, clear. So I will put a link to this in the description below as well, and let's get started with the links first. Here's a quick look at what comes with the Club5 Racing high clearance links for the Element Enduro. So you'll see these, they've got a Traxxas style rod ends right there, metal pivot balls. Here are the rear, lower, and upper links, and the front, lower, and upper links. It's always helpful to have these ProTech RC shock pliers, and I'll also put a link to these in the description below, but they're a handy tool to have around. I highly recommend it. What I'm using here is another handy tool for rod ends and links. This is made by Humboldt EF on Thingiverse, and I'll put a link to this in the description below as well. The rear upper link is 117 millimeters in length, and it will say on the link right there. And the rear lower link is 125 millimeters. So you won't get mixed up with which links are which, because it does have the length engraved onto the link. Alright, so with the front links, the front upper link is, let's see here, the front upper link is 100 millimeters. Let's see if we can see that. A little bit hard to see right there. And the lower links are 110 millimeters. And that's for the front. Alright, so now I'm ready to put these metal pivot balls into the rod ends. And the nice thing about having this Protect RC shock pliers is that it makes it really easy. Alright, we've just completed assembling the Club5 Racing high clearance links. Let's go ahead and start putting these links on the chassis before we continue on with the other links and shock braces and whatnot. Alright, we have the rear high clearance links installed, and it's time to move on to the front. Alright, we've completed installing the Club5 Racing high clearance links, and now we'll move on to installing my custom rear mid-chassis brace to clear these links. So you'll see, well, the stock brace I'm using here, or it's not really stock, but it's part of the brace for the battery tray. It actually does allow quite a bit of clearance, but it still does hit at the top here. You'll see that. With this brace off of Thingiverse, it definitely does hit the high clearance links and prevents it from compressing all the way. Now my brace here should take care of that. So we'll go ahead and install that right now. You see, they're not quite a different version of this brace, so I'm going to go ahead and bolt it. Alright, so here is my custom rear brace, or mid chassis brace. You'll see that it allows the high clearance links to compress fully. Yeah, here you can see the cutaway. So the shocks will bottom out before it actually hits the brace. You can't tell right now because the shocks aren't mounted. Alright, now we are going to install this rear chassis brace mount that I also created, and I'll put a link to both of these in the description below, but this one is specifically so I can mount the IERC rear Shorty bed. And just to show you what I was using before, I was using this aluminum plate, and now I am using a 3D printed piece that should also give more rigidity to the rear of the frame. Here's another look at the 3D printed pieces. The rear chassis brace and the mid chassis brace. And these are IERC shock towers, and I'll put a link to these in the description below as well. And here's a look at the IERC Shorty tray, all mounted up to the rear chassis brace. Okay, we're going to move on to the Club5 brass shock bushings, and I'll put a link to these in the description below as well. Alright, so these are for the upper part of the shocks, and you're going to want to thread them through the shocks and use the supplied O-rings on either side. So let me just take one shock off for you to see. Let's make this a little easier. There you go. Much easier. Alright, so you've got one side on. Now you've got to put the other side on. Alright, so now you can see that there's an O-ring on either side. Now you're going to want to put the lower pivot ball on. Let's go ahead and mount it up. make sure for the bottom of the shock that this larger diameter part of the pivot ball is facing outwards. Where did my screw just go? Wash your hands too. Actually, looks like I'm gonna need a longer screw than normal because these bushings now are pushed out a little further, so I'll need a longer screw to thread in this rod here. Alright, like I said earlier, in my particular case, I need a longer screw. Because I will be using a spacer right here. Alright, so we've got these shock bushings mounted up on the rear shocks. That's all done. Move on to the front.
Looks like I found the version as well. Should do it. But look at the little part of these on as well. So I'll change the other side just a minute. Back here, change this up a little more.
Alright, that's a little better. And we are done with the shock bushings. See the shock bushings here. So that should be a nice improvement in the slop as far as the shocks go. Take a look at all these shock bushings. And you can see here, it's no longer got that wiggle that the stock has. Pretty snug right there. So no play right there. And that is the Club5 shock bushings. And the only thing we have left is the Club5 steering links, and we'll get to that in just a bit. Alright, with the last bit here, we're going to be taking care of this issue. You can see that the stock steering links now has a little play and a little wobble there. So we're going to be getting rid of that with the Club5 steering links. And that's the set right here. Alright, these are the parts for the Club5 steering links, and the first thing we're going to do is put these links together. Alright, so let's go over the links. This is the behind the axle steering link, and it should be assembled like so. This is the drag link, and this one should be assembled with the rod ends like this. This one towards the servo, this side towards the servo arm, and this side towards the knuckle. So the rod end should be angled like that. And this one is the panhard rod. And for this one, just easy way to know which way it should go is it should say crawler central with the 85mm in the front. And this side of the rod end should angle like this, and the axle side should be like that. Alright, before I continue with installing the steering links, I just want to go over these high clearance links from Club5 Racing. Now, I did run into an issue, but there is a reason for that. If you are running the links at the stock position, which is upright, like that. If you're running the stocks in the stock position, meaning that they're upright, you should be fine with installing the bend near the skid. If you're running your shocks in a lean forward position like mine, or you're just allowing the rear axle to compress pretty far up, then you might want to switch these links to have the bend near the link mounts on the axle, and I'll tell you why. From the first glance, it doesn't seem like there's an issue running them this way. I mean, there's plenty of clearance, as you can see. But if you are compressing the axle one side at a time, you can see that the bends in the lower link and the upper link will hit each other. Now, it isn't that much of an issue for me. It'll still work, but depending on the position of your axle or how much you can have it compressed, it could be an issue, and you might, get bound up like that. But see, the pivot balls I have allow it to turn away, but it still touches the drive shaft. So that is the reason I'll move these bends toward the axle, and the drive shaft will be exposed. So what we can do to remedy that is to lengthen the upper links to pivot this pinion upwards, and so the drive shaft won't be as exposed. So if you're running the stocks in the shock, or if you're running the shocks in the stock position, you should be okay running these links this way. But if you're like me, running the shocks lean forward, then you probably want this bend towards the axle. Alright, I've now swapped the high clearance links around so that the bend is near the axle. You can see that the drive shaft is more exposed, but I think with the tires on, you actually won't see it really hit the drive shaft here. I can lengthen the upper links to move this pinion up, or the drive shaft up, but you can see here, works just fine. And the issue before, where when the bend is on this side, if you compress one side only, these part of the links would hit each other, is no longer an issue. At least it isn't an issue with the bend over on this side. So it's mainly an issue if you have your shocks lean forward like this, like I do. So that would be why you would need to do it this way. If you have it in the stock setup where it doesn't allow you to compress past this certain point, like right here, then having the bend on this side isn't so much of an issue. But because I do allow for my axle to compress up to this height right here, it is an issue if the bend is at the skid. So you do need to be aware of that, and have the bend on the axle side if you do allow maximum compression, like that. And same thing with the front. One thing with the links this way, I running my lowered battery tray, it doesn't hit it. With the bend over at the skid, it would hit it. It probably wouldn't hit it if I was using the stock battery tray, but since I am using a lower battery tray by about 5 millimeters, it would hit it. With the links this way, it does not hit it any longer. So with that being said, and with that taken care of, we should now move on to the steering links. And once again, this is the kind of slop that I want to get rid of. You can see here that movement right there. So we're gonna install these in just a bit. Remember, with the panhard rod, you should have the crawler central engraving and the length facing towards the front of the vehicle, and so it should look like this. Alright, looks like I might want a screw that's a tad longer, just so that it can fully thread through the nylon lock nut. So I'm going to look for one that's a little bit longer than this, and I'll be right back. Alright, so the original screw was at M3x14, and I'm going to be using M3x15s. Alright, looks like I'm going to need a M3x15 over here as well. I don't think the M3x14s will give me enough thread. Alright, and that completes the install of the steering links from Club5 Racing. You can see here there's definitely less slop. Right there, you don't see that moving right there. So definitely an improvement. Nice thick beefy rods as well. Just check compression, make sure nothing is binding. All looks good. One thing I do need to adjust is the servo horn. With the servo horn that I have right now, my steering link and panhard rod aren't exactly parallel, so I'll have to fix that. I'm gonna have to get a lower profile servo horn or raise the servo up. But that's about it. Overall, worthwhile upgrades for the Element Enduro, which is basically the Club5 Racing link sets, the high clearance links and the steering links, as well as the shock bushing. So very happy with the parts. Definitely can't wait to get this out on the rocks again. A lot of the drive, or a lot of the slop in the suspension has been taken care of. It's pretty much slop from wear and tear. With these links on, the tolerances have become a little bit tighter, and you can see here that I've also installed my 3D printed mid chassis brace to clear the high clearance links right there. So really excited about that as well. One of my first 3D prints, or designed 3D prints, as well as this chassis brace for the, or mounting plate for the IE Shorty bed right there. So really cool stuff. Definitely happy with it. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for notifications on the future updates of this Element Enduro or running videos. Thanks for watching.